Hi, everyone. I am so excited to introduce to you the Reeves family, or part of the Reeves family. We have a family of teachers here. We have Karen and Greg Reeves and Marcy Reeves D'Alessandro, who some of you have met. And I'm just going to give you a little background of how amazing this family is. So Greg has been a teacher, consultant, VP, principal, and director of education, as well as having taught at various faculties of education. Karen, same thing. Teacher, consultant, VP, principal, and has taught at faculties of education. And Mar has been a teacher, special ed teacher, consultant, and is now a VP of an online school. So thank you, Reeves family. And just as an aside, I've known the Reeves family for many, many, many years. I was the maid of honor in the Karen and Greg wedding.
That's coming up 41 years ago.
Right. I was very young when I was the.
I was 10.
So we're going to talk about Practicum and from their roles as administrators to how to prepare you for this Practicum experience. So we've prepared 4 questions and everybody's going to answer from their own perspective. So I'm going to start with Karen and Greg. What advice would you give our teacher candidates as they enter their first Practicum?
Well, Greg and I sat down earlier today to review the questions, and our advice is very practical, sort of step by step. The very first thing is to go to the front office and sign in, introduce yourself to the school secretary, and ask the school secretary if there's a possibility that you could meet the principal and vice principals to say hello and introduce yourself as well. And then make your way to meet your teacher, your associate teacher that you're going to be working with. It's so important as a school principal. First off, I wanted to know who the teachers were that were coming in from the faculty. I would actually take the time to go and observe a class that they taught, because down the road, if they apply to the school board, then I have firsthand seen them in the classroom and know how they interact with the other staff members and with the children in that classroom. So it's very important part to recall.
Now, if I can just add, we recognize at this point, everything's online, or you may be going outside, the Toronto area to teach. So those are practical things that you should do when you go into the school. But as an online person, I think that will be different. Marcy will be able to give you great information about what that looks like when you first enter now, as opposed to the traditional way of entering the school.
Yeah, Mara, what's your take on that?
So what I would say is, first of all, you want to teaching is all about relationships. So you want to really make sure, and just as my mom said, you're introducing yourself kind of practically, but the kind of deeper meaning there is that you're really starting to cultivate the relationships with your staff, with your practicum teacher, and then eventually with your students. So what I would say, the online version of that is ask for a meet. Our board uses Google Meet, so a meet or a Zoom with the principal or the vice principal, just so that you're able to, it's so hard online to really get to know someone, but when you're sitting in a Zoom or a Meet, you have that time. And what some of the teachers in my school have found is that they actually know their kids on a different level because they're right into their homes. And I would say that it's the same thing with your administrators, because we got dogs or cats coming in or kids a lot of times too. So even though you might feel nervous or shy to reach out to your principal or vice principal to ask for an individual meet, just to, introduce yourself, I would really encourage you to do that. And the same with your associate teacher as well, because when you're in an online classroom, there won't be a lot of opportunity for you and the online teacher to speak when there's kids in the meet as well. So make sure that you're setting aside time to have that just one-on-one meet with your principals or your associate teacher.
And it might be an idea as well, is during your day, write those questions down. So then at the end of the day, you can discuss those with your associate teacher rather than to interrupt sort of throughout. It's too difficult, as Marcy just said, to do that even if you're physically in the building, in the classroom, it's still difficult to stop, talk to your associate teacher, and then come back to something. A little book that you can, jot things down or journal. Make time every day, even if it's 10 minutes at the end of each day, to talk to your associate teacher.
The other thing is that the importance of what Marcy said about even just trying to meet with the principal or vice principal. So you know that the system at the board office is you'll be applying for positions. And as you apply for positions, the HR person will take in your resume, and at that point, we'll see where your practicum was and what happened. And they may phone at that point to say, we're just confirming that that person's at the school and that. And if I'm a principal trying to hire for my school, it would be an opportunity for me saying, you know what, I saw that person in the class today, and if it comes up, we're looking for a whatever grade or secondary position that you're asking for, and that may be a help to you.
Also, in meeting your associate teacher, you're going to get to know that person better over time. But remember that person is your supervisor. Mm-hmm. They're the ones writing your report. You be humble, but confident. And also, you may see practices that teacher has in place that you don't agree with. But it's not the time for you to correct that person. It's the time to be respectful and to be polite. And, you're going to learn some strategies of what to do, but also what not to do. But it's not your role to correct your associate teacher.
To put an accent on that is, this is that teacher's classroom, and they may have to change their methodology depending on who is in front of them, and use different methodologies, to help with classroom management or curriculum development or whatever they're into at that point. So I think it's an opportunity to learn different methodologies, as opposed to think that your methodology is
the only one.
You're going to have to use multiple methodologies depending on the class that you have in front of you, and you may have to change mid-year or mid-week depending on this pandemic is so difficult for everyone, and so you may have to do different things. Marcy, I know she's experiencing it firsthand right now.
Mm-hmm. I would also add too that as a student teacher, you might not have the full picture. So when you're in these meetings and you're talking with your associate teacher and you're curious about how they implemented a certain strategy, and even if you're thinking, I wouldn't have done that, there is a way to ask respectfully to say, so tell me about this, and you might hear more information. We had a practicum teacher that was very upset with the fact that we weren't really following up with the student. But the piece of information that she didn't know, and she was great to be respectful about it, was that the older sister had cancer and was at sick kids all the time. So when you have that information, it gives you a different lens to look at the problem, and it gives you change your set of tools depending on the bigger picture.
Absolutely. And I think there's also the piece for our candidates to understand that the teacher is really under stress right now. This is a stressful situation. You're trying to juggle online learning. They may have kids of their own at home. And so just to be respectful of the possibility that stress is a factor in how they're interacting. So thanks for that. So my next question is,
Can I just add to that one little piece? Number one is, it is stressful for the candidates to go into someone else's classroom. I mean, we all remember our practice teaching, and it is stressful to go into that. So I would imagine even in your year with the candidates, because it is so different, they're under stress as well.
yeah,
And people being under stress as candidates are probably behaving a bit differently than you do. So the really big point we're stressing here is I'd like to talk about building a relationship and being respectful of that relationship.
okay, thank you. My next question is, so this is an online learning environment that they're going into in terms of practicum. They're not going to be face-to-face. So we're going to look at what are some of the big look-fors that the teacher candidates should take into consideration going into a school or a classroom, or in this case, the online learning environment. And we're going to welcome David here. Hi, David.
Hi, David.
So Jack, I can head that one on. One of the things that I would really stress for you to take a look at is how assessment is being done, because this has provided a completely unique experience where when you take a look at how you typically grab your assessments, it's a triangulation, right? So you're looking at the observation, you're looking at conversations, and you're looking at products. So like tests and assignments. And for lots of teachers, even though that's not very new, this is me multitasking, they still rely too heavily on just the products, so the assignments and the tests. And what we know is that if you're not asking really deep or higher level questions, it's very easy for the students just to Google the answers. So you want to make sure that, and this is Andrew, this is number 2, and this is why you might get to know your associate principals a little bit more because their family comes in and out. So I would say you really have to think hard about what type of questions you're asking when you're doing assessment. How are you going to capture and how are you going to quantify those conversations that you're having for assessment? And your observations are totally different because you're taking a look at how are they interacting on the chat? How do they respond to questions? Do they ever have their camera on? And again, that through the lens of we're in a pandemic, we know that anxiety and depression is at an all-time high for everybody. So those kids that don't turn their cameras on, you know, some of them are just being silly, but some of them really, it is a struggle for them to turn their cameras on. They're very uncomfortable with it and they're introverts. So you have to really rely on different methods of assessment. You have to make sure that your questions are really good questions that kids can't just Google. So I would say pay particular attention to that. I would also really pay particular attention to how the teacher is establishing community in the classroom. So a really good thing that we implement every day, whether the kids are synchronous or asynchronous, they have to check in at before 9:30. And the teachers are very creative in the way that they are doing attendance. So we have one teacher doing, it's like it's a Kahoot. So I'm sure that lots of you know what a Kahoot is, but it's an online system where it's kind of like a Jeopardy game. And the kids have taken different pictures of their workspaces and kids have to guess whose workspace it is. The kids, instead of, you know, just saying here, they have to talk about what's your favorite food. Just a chance to make sure, and they're intentional about making sure that each kid at some point is turning on their camera and is vocal. Because we have found that is to be a big struggle. And the teachers that aren't doing that and just taking attendance and not intentionally calling the kids out by name is another one that we found. We have way more engagement when teachers are using names. So just pay attention to those little, and they're, you know, the great teachers make it look easy, but really be writing down, okay, the teacher is saying their names. They're very prompt with positive reinforcement. You know, they're really trying trying hard to establish a community online, and have different times and different, so sometimes they're academic, sometimes they're social, but you're providing that for students. And I would really be watching that, especially, I hope that this ends, but if we do have to teach online next year again too, I think that those are all important things when you're teaching online, but also when you're in the classroom. We're going to go back and we will be better teachers because of it.
Great point. So maybe we'll get very practical at this point, because when you go into a school, you'll have school policies and you'll have classroom policies. So the school policies talk about things like attendance, and you want to watch, when does attendance take place? How does it take place? And all the issues that go with attendance, because that's very important. And I think that the research will tell you, when parents drop kids off at school, the number one thing they want is safe. They want to know they're dropping them off in a safe environment. Number two is happy. They want to be happy. And number three is the curriculum, an excellent curriculum. So online, when they're coming up online, kids need to feel safe. And how are you making them feel safe? So Marcy brought some great points up, and that's a new reality that we have to think of online. How do we make them feel safe? Because as Jackie said earlier, when you're in person, to create community is a lot easier because you get body language, and 80% of communication is body language versus verbal. So that would bring also to the point of how serious professional dress is, especially online, and because they don't know you. So you want to present very professional. And even though your associate teacher may not be presenting the way I'm talking here, they have that right. You don't. So you need to be as professional as you can be in your language, in your behavior, and in your dress.
Right, absolutely.
So did you want to add?
Okay, Jack. Greg and I, as I mentioned earlier, sat down and wrote things out, but we were thinking more, leave the online to Marcy, but truly, and maybe too optimistically, we could all be back in the building in September. Yeah. So what we did was, and I'm just going to read this list if you want me to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the first thing you need to learn are the school rules, what the start time is and what all the other bell times are. You need to learn what the fire alarm procedures are, because if you're teaching and the fire alarm goes off and you have no idea what exit you're to take, that's an issue. You need to learn lockdown procedures in the school, and what that means and what your role is as a classroom teacher. You need to learn the student, how do kids come into the school? How do they go out for recess time? And how do they exit at the end of the day? What doors do they use? All the real little practical things.
Busing, all that.
Lining up for buses. What are the washroom routines in the school? Is there a sign out chart at the classroom door that the student has to sign? Do they raise their hand? Are they allowed? Do you take them as a whole class to go to the washroom? And in the primary classes, often that's the case. So you need to ask your associate teacher those kinds of questions. What is the classroom routine for collecting parent notes?
Pizza orders.
Pizza orders, going on a class trip, permission forms. And many teachers will have like a bucket inside the classroom door, and students go to their desk, they get out their agenda, they take the permission form, put it in the bucket at the door. So all of those notes that you don't miss as a classroom teacher, any note that's coming from a parent.
And it may all be online right now, so none of this applies, but it may be worthwhile to know these things that if you do go back into the school.
That's right.
I just want to add too, because I would say that most teachers are probably using programs like Seesaw or Remind. You want to be very careful that whatever program that you are going to use, you're planning to use, that it has been approved by the board. There's lots of security issues with many programs. So for instance, Remind, because it collects data and the server isn't based in Canada, is subject to California laws. So our board says absolutely not, you cannot use Remind. So any of those more online or digital communication pieces with parents, you want to make sure you're using a board approved one.
Right.
So that's the school rules.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And, you review the class list, and of major importance is, what are the medical issues in your class? Behavior issues, custody issues. If a parent doesn't have custody and somehow they come to your classroom door when maybe they didn't sign into the office even, you need to know if that parent has custody of the child or not. Also, academic concerns. It's important. You'll learn to go to the OSR, which is the Ontario Student Record, and take a look. All that information about custody, medical, everything is in that OSR. And so a student may have an IEP, an individual education plan, and that's where you see all the strategies that have been put into place. Now, Marsh, you might want to talk about how you do that online.
I mean, that has been a struggle. In our board, we still have the students that are on our virtual school are still technically students of their home school. So the homeschool certs are still responsible. So I mean, you talk about stress. Instead of having, you know, your one cert that you have to conference with, some of our teachers have 8 certs to conference with, because the OSR doesn't move. It's still housed in their home school. So we have like an online, Maplewood is what we're currently using. So we have a lot of that information there. But we instructed all the teachers to also contact the home certs of their students as well to find out more information. Sometimes you find out stuff that, you know, teachers don't want to write down in an OSR that is important to know. For instance, if, you know, well, if I go back to my example of the sister being, the older sister having cancer, that's not going to be in the OSR, but the cert of the school knows that because they know the family.
Yeah, and the other thing, Marcy, you may want to comment too on, they don't come to your classroom door anymore. They actually come into your classroom through the online system, and sometimes inappropriately.
Yeah, we have had hilarious stories. There's all sorts of things that happen. We've seen pythons. We've seen dad in the background with just his underwear on. So
I'm thinking about the parent that is upset, because the parents, this is what's happening. And I can testify to this because actually I was helping, Karen and I were helping Marcy with her children when they were at home, because she's obviously working. And it is very difficult for kids to deal with the parents, and the parents to deal with some of the issues the students are having, because you all know the old story is, you know, even when you're doing homework with your children at home, they say, well, the teacher said you're not supposed to do it that way. You know, like, well, I am a teacher and I think I might know, but anyways, so it is a struggle for kids. So parents get really frustrated and will have an upset at home and then come online right into your classroom and say, what are you doing? I don't know how to do it, you know, and it's very difficult for that point, how to manage that. So you really want to find out from your associate teacher, because she's or he has probably experienced it, to say, what do I do at that point? So if you are teaching online, you'll know how to react to that.
And I think
Yeah.
In one of the other videos that I've done, we had a vice principal who talked about when those kinds of things happen, to ensure that the administrator knows and that you have the support of the administrator. And in some cases, they will guide you on what to do. And in other cases, they may actually have to step in.
Yes.
So, yeah. And so I'm just curious too, what we would normally say to teacher candidates if they were going into a face-to-face environment would be do a walk around of the school, a walk around of the community, get to know what the community is all about, the demographics, etc.
That was our Our next point.
Oh, that was your next point. I was going to say, but actually they can do that in an online environment. All of that information exists on the website. So take it away, Karen.
Well, our what we have here is
We talk about learning the culture.
Yes.
learning the culture of the school community, and your associate teacher would be able to tell you what are the cultural norms from school to school that could differ greatly.
So, you may have, depending on the ethnic background and socioeconomic background of the community you're serving. And I want to emphasize the word serving, because if you're not ready to walk into a school as a teacher and know the role is you become a servant, because you're serving, and servant not in a bad way, but servant in a very good way, because you're serving that community. And the parents are handing you their most trusted possessions.
Mhm.
That is so important. And you need to gain their trust. And, I think that one of the things that I learned early was when kids came into my classroom, I always asked them about how was the hockey game last night, or how was the gymnastics, or gee, did you get a new shirt, or you got your hair cut, and I saw your grandparent drop you off today. Like that personal touch to kids is what they will remember. They won't remember your great math lesson.
And you have to remember as well, parents are sending you the very best they've got. So don't dare go into a staff room and talk about kids, because you're going to have misbehaviors. I don't think in my 30 some odd years there was ever a class without a student that had a behavior identification even. And so I would often say in the beginning of the school year to my staff, if you go into a staff room and talk about a student in a negative way, it's more of a reflection on you, not on that poor little kid that's trying their best.
Yeah, you're getting the best they got. And the other thing you should know is that I always remember when I was doing class lists in preparation for next year's, when teachers would come in and say, oh, like you're giving me that one, or because students develop a bit of a reputation. And how lucky is the child that walks into your class and says, you're going to have the best year you've ever had. So really, you have to recognize you're going in to serve, and you have to be humble about it, and you have to be grateful.
And to know that how the child was in another teacher's classroom is not how that child is going to be in your classroom. It's a fresh start. I always talk about beginner's mind. Start the year, or start the practicum with a beginner's mind, as if you've never experienced this before, and look for all the joy and wonder that exists. Marty, do you want to say anything about that in the online environment?
I mean, it's the same thing. There's lots that, it goes over in both ways. And then I think that it's super important to make sure you're also creating time, that you have breakout rooms with smaller groups of kids, because they feel more comfortable to talk to you. They feel more comfortable to talk to each other. And even I'm guilty of it myself. When I'm on a principals meeting with 30, other principals, I'm not as vocal as I am in a smaller group setting. So just to remember, that's another strategy to try and get to know the kids. We have teachers now that know, and this is where it is almost more intimate in a way, where they know grandparents, they know mom and dad, they know you are teaching, especially the younger you get. Some of my teachers say there's two classes. There are your students, and then there's the parents. And we went through a journey of, with the parents, and some of the teachers are coaching now the parents on how to, help their kid with the gradual release of responsibility, because there was a lot of frustration there. But then we realized we've almost got in those little primary classes one-to-one help. So let's take that and use that to our advantage and spin the way that we're looking at it instead of, well, the parents doing all the work, that we start to coach the parents to say, okay, now, let Johnny do that himself. And we have some wonderful teachers who are able to say it in a nice and friendly and sort of jokey way to say, okay, I get that you get it, but let's try Johnny now. So I just think that you always want to be so welcoming. When I worked at the Holiday Inn, I was a lifeguard there, and we had this rule. And it was called the 10 and 5 rule. So if you saw anybody at 10 feet, you smiled at them. And at 5 feet, you said hello. And I have carried that with me. And I think that there's lots of teachers that think, oh, they're not my students, or they're big grade 8s, or, but if you continue to always be warm and welcoming, do the 10 and 5 rule, always make sure you're saying hi to everybody. It changes the dynamics of how students see you. And I think it's really important that they know you're always happy and friendly and willing to help.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love that. I love that.
Back to,
oh, sorry, go ahead, Karen.
Talking about in the staff room or in the hallway, it's a hard job. So you do need to have a person on staff that you can confide in, but it's not, those conversations take place privately to that one person that you can confide in. You don't make it public.
Yeah, and the other thing is, if you're having trouble with a student in your class, now this is not so much now because your associate teacher would be your key person to go to, but when you start in schools, it's important not just to hold it by yourself in the classroom if you're having a struggle. That's, the vice principals and principals recognize your new teachers, and they're there to help you. And you should be able to go to them and say, I'm having trouble with. And they may direct you to the CERT, who maybe have more information, as Marcy articulated earlier. The previous classroom teacher may have gotten along well and had good strategies. Because we know with our own kids, there was one year we had a struggle, and one of them, we didn't understand what was happening, but their best friend was in the other classroom, and they were just unhappy. And they were upset that they were apart. And so that reflected in their work and sort of in their attitude and stuff. And so once we had that figured out, it was an easy solve. But it's those little things kids carry, they don't tell you, and you're wondering what's wrong. And there's other people on staff who can help you with that struggle.
Yeah, I always tell people that asking for help is not a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of strength. You're recognizing that you need help, and that with help, the situation is going to improve. It kind of leads me into my next question, which is about developing the relationship with the associate teacher. What's the best way to go about it?
Well, the do's and the don'ts. I'll read some of the do's.
Marcy, stop smiling at us because we made a list and all that sort of
Yes,
stuff.
I'm a list person. I can't help it. It's just in my nature. Be polite and respectful. Be on time and be prepared.
Be on time. Be on time. There's nothing more annoying. You can't be late for you just can't be late for your class.
That's right.
So it's a safety issue.
Observe the associate teacher's methodologies in curriculum and in classroom management. And classroom management is a big one for sure. If possible, ask, and we talked about this before, ask your associate teacher if you can meet, even if it's for a few minutes each day, to touch base about how the day went and about what's to happen the next day. And set up for tomorrow. I think the more prepared you are going in the morning, get there early. I mean, Greg is saying be on time, but get there early to be totally planned, totally organized, so you're not having to run out of the classroom or to get something. Now, I know online that's going to look a little bit different, but
online is temporary. and it's a very difficult time. So there's other new rules that are coming into place, and that's why Marcy's key to this conversation. But once it goes back to somewhat of a normality in the schools, and you're hearing sick kids talk about it and how important schools are. And we were watching a program on CBC last night that addressed also the needs of kids to be in school. And, that's probably more important than COVID because of the psychological nature of it. Because schools are social buildings. They're not just, and yourself, look at your own school experience. It shapes you and informs you about who you are. So that's really important to have a whole concept of that as you begin your career. The don'ts. Do be humble. Don't be know-it-all. Like you can't, I know you probably wouldn't intend it, but the worst thing you can probably do is walk in and say, well, my professor told me that we're supposed to operate this way in curriculum, and you won't have a good relationship with your teacher, your associate that way. You go in and be respectful and learn from they're pros. They're professional teachers. And put yourself always in the other person's shoes and think, if you had a teacher, would you want them telling you how to behave in your classroom? So that's a really important concept, that you be respectful, you be humble, and you know that they're your supervisor in writing your reports. And so you want to learn from them. And Marcy articulated it here. It's a very good thing, as Karen saw in your meeting, to be respectful and say, so tell me how, I want to learn. So I'd like to know why you behave that way with that student or with that parent or with the other staff member or whoever it is. So just have them respectfully to tell me about that, because there's key pieces that you'll have to learn, because as long as we've been in it, every day is still a learning day. You learn something new because you're dealing with people.
Absolutely.
You want to comment on
So
that?
let me add in, Dan. So first of all, I would say I hope that everybody is good at building relationships, because at the end of the day, that is what teaching is. So you're taking interest in your associate teacher, you're asking them questions, you're finding, what do you have in common? And I would say, go in with the mindset of learning. It might not be the way you would do it or that you've been taught, but when I was a consultant or when I was a CERT, I would often go into different classrooms, and I was always amazed that even though there's a wide variety of different personalities and different talents, if you really look for people's strengths, you will find them. And even if you think your associate teacher is not, it's not a great match, still look for their strengths, because they are in education and they have made it that far because they do bring strengths to the table. In your meetings that I suggest you have with your associate teachers, I would just be straight up front with saying, okay, well, what do you see as areas that I can improve in? So, and just so that I mean, it's a bit of a scary question, but as a VP, I continue to ask my principal to say, if I've done a staff meeting, I'll say, okay, how could I have gotten better? What could I have done differently that would make it even better? And to be honest, it's a hard question to reply to, but when you warn, and you show your associate teacher you're open to learning, I'm not going to be offended by the criticism. I'm going to work to get better. If you constantly have that mindset, they also have an easier time answering. So continue to ask, how can I do better? And don't wait till your report to find out what they think. Continue to ask them. I would also say, always and obviously within reason, but say yes. If your associate teacher asks you to do something, say yes.
A lot about the feedback that you've been talking about now. So, most teachers are going to be forthcoming with feedback, but some are just not comfortable with it. So Marcy's advice on asking for feedback is very, very important. And, you know, I've talked about with my candidates 2 stars and a wish. So ask them, frame it for them, give them some ideas. And the other thing is, that's a huge, huge part of this is the way you accept feedback. If you balk at it or you're resistant to it, that is not going to serve you. And in fact, principals will ask the referee, how are they at accepting feedback? So if I've been your advisor and I have to say, well, not very well, you know, they get upset every time they get some constructive criticism, that's not going to bode well. So make sure that you're accepting the feedback in the vein that it was meant. It's meant to help you grow. So we have one more question. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Greg.
Just when I was getting some feedback once upon a time, the way it was framed for me was, look, I'm going to be the mirror and give you some feedback. Your job is to reflect on it.
I love that.
So that's just the way to think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So my last question is about planning and preparation, because I know that sometimes, you know, associate teachers are not planning in the same way that our candidates are because they're experienced people. They've been doing it for a long time. So they don't have full-on lesson plans, but our expectation at OISE is that, you know, when you're doing, especially in the beginning, you're doing full lesson plans. And so what can you say to our candidates about being prepared?
Well, we have a lot to say about that.
Yeah. The first thing is, during your practicum, it's all consuming.
Yes.
It is hard work, and what you should really be focused on is how you're eating, exercising, and make sure you get some sleep. That's a good start. Get to school early to set up your lessons and set up your materials, or online, Mars, same thing, right?
Check your connections.
Yes, check your connection.
Talk to your associate teacher about daily expectations. Have your day plans done. Now, on my staff, I had many of my staff members do their plans on Sunday for the entire week, because that way it just freed up that piece of it. And that's a strategy that worked for them.
When one of the other things that I saw that was for highly successful people that were in the profession and some of the best teachers, when they put a unit together, they put the whole unit together at the beginning, so they knew, you know, what the expectations at the end were. So begin with the end in mind and put the unit together. But as soon as you put the unit together, then it allows you to pace the day with the unit, like your time that you've allotted to the unit. So pacing is important, because especially with online, and what I've observed is that someday it's a very difficult day for people. It's the 4th day in a row online. They're antsy and whatever. So what you had intended on covering, you may not get to.
Right.
But then Tuesday of the next week, maybe they're right on and you're going to go further than you expect. So as long as you have some timelines and pacing, and you'll hear that a lot, it's going to help in your teaching and feedback with kids and doing the assessment with conversations and observations, not just products. So it's a very important piece to pace and put the unit together. So if you find from your associate teacher what they intend you to teach, you know, a little more work at the beginning makes it a lot easier along the way.
Absolutely. Thank you. Marty, add to that?
I was going to say that, yeah, so a couple things, because I know, and lots of times you'll hear teachers balk at the huge lesson plans that they have to write, but the truth is there's, like, teaching is such an art. And when you bring in the fact that you want to make sure that not only are you hitting your learning goals, but you're, you know, laying the groundwork and showing kids those like soft and hard skills on how to do and maneuver different things. I just like to have it all out. I like to know exactly what you base it off of the curriculum documents, and I know a lot of teachers will, you know, go to Teachers Pay Teachers, and they'll go to the textbooks, which both are fine, but really start with those curriculum expectations, so that at the end, just like my dad said, you can say, for sure, I know that I've done this, I can use this as a comment on the report card. And when you're planning, just one of the things that I know that as a first year teacher, I made the mistake, and even when teachers were getting online, they forgot about the groundwork, those set of skills that, you know, take classroom time. It takes a long time to get those routines in order. It is so important to spend time on that, so that, and it's the same sort of idea where you're teaching either classroom transitions, you're teaching kids how to, you know, use Google Classroom. For you to expect kids to just understand how to do self and peer assessment is they need to be specifically and directly taught, because then once you do that, or even research skills, because if you're going into, say, more of a deep learning project, then when you're really concrete about those like groundwork and those base skills, then that's where, you know, the lesson plans don't have to be so detailed, because you've done that piece of it. And when they're into deep learning and they're all doing their own, following their own interests, you know for sure that you have met that groundwork piece, so that they're able to achieve the skills. Because you do want to individualize it, especially in those deep learning projects, but you want to have a master plan of where it's all going. It's not a free-for-all, which is a little bit, you know, with the deep learning, it did kind of go off there sometimes.
You're lucky enough to have an associate teacher who's highly skilled, and it's a wonder to walk into those classrooms and everything's just working. But what Marcy just said is how much work that person has done behind the scenes is so important. Mm-hmm. And to actually work at writing a plan, to understand, you know, where you want it to end up, to have objectives, to have strategies, to have timelines, materials. It's very helpful, because if you're trying to get here and you don't have the materials that are related to the strategies, then, you know, you're not going to know where you're going, and kids will take you different places. It is an interesting.
The kids need to know too that there's an end in mind, and these are the stops along the way.
And you should show them. Like I used to. One of the best things we did was at the beginning of units, no matter what the unit was, I used to write the actual test I was going to give them at the end, and I would give them the test, and they would all get 0 and fail and all that sort of stuff. And then at the end of the unit, I gave them the test again, and they all got an A. And I told everybody has an opportunity to get an A, because if you do this work, you will get an A. And it is amazing to kids, because I would attach the first pretest to the last test and have the parents sign it. Because as you know, I don't know, it's probably a different question right now online, but if you ever ask your child, so what did you learn at school today? And they all say nothing, it's just not a great advertisement for schools. So this way, if you attach it, you can say, well, I learned something.
So open communication and solid planning, great relationships. So is there any last minute words of wisdom that you'd like to give to the candidates? Any of you?
Well, I'll start. I'll just say, have fun.
Yeah.
Because the kids are a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And what comes out of them, and right now you can have fun with the parents, as Marcy was saying, and what's happening in those homes through online. I mean, it is hilarious. And some of the comments we've read sort of online by parents and say, you know, today I got fired because I was drinking, and I had to suspend my whole class, which was my 2 kids. So, you know, it like parents may have a whole new appreciation for the profession.
Yes.
and what you're offering our kids. Easy. And Karen was right what she said earlier. Like, you really have to dedicate yourself to your practicum, and that means a little bit of sacrifice and so forth. But it is worth it. Every moment is worth it.
Yeah.
Take the joy in those people, those little people that you encounter. Fabulous job. It's a hard job, but I think one of the most rewarding. And for us, it was our very favorite year of all of our schooling. They call it Faculty of Ed. We called it Teachers College. And Greg and I met in Teachers College. So that's why we think that was our very best year of school.
Oh my God. So I would say, and this is what I say to my kids every single day, and this is like the 2 rules in my classroom, and is 2 things. If you work hard and you're kind, everything will fall into place. So be kind with yourself, be kind with your associate teacher, with all those little kids that are looking up to you, and lots of them have more baggage than we'd ever imagine. So just work hard and be kind.
Thank you, Reeves family. That was amazing. Thank you so, so much. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. Nice to see you all, and we wish you well, and I hope you do well in your practicum.